Okay, so I think we're now active. Turn my video back on and share the screen. Um, so hopefully people see the screen.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay, so this is work that's come about as I mentioned a minute ago, work that's come about just in the last month. Though the data we've had for a while. Um,
Hmm.
so this is the famous Voynich manuscript, which is at the Beinecke Library at Yale. And for those who don't know, I suspect everybody does. This is a illustrated handwritten book in an unknown language that people call Voynichese. Um, they have fairly recently found out that the parchment is calfskin, and they've dated it from the 15th century. Um, but there are pictures in it that the claim is um, people would not have known about until Columbus returned. And so they don't think this was written before 1493. There's an extensive discussion on the Beinecke website that you can take a look at. And I didn't know this myself, named after the Polish book dealer who bought it in 1912. Um, so they're just a couple, all the leaves are online, so you can go see them yourself. Um, it's lots of illustrations, and the pages generally people have generally divided the pages into 6 sections. Um, and as I said, the description, the language is unknown. People have been trying to decode it for a while. So the back in 2014, several of us went to the Beinecke under the leadership of Chet Van Duzer to image the 1491 world map that Columbus knew about. And that's Chet and Ken Boydston, Mike Phelps, Greg Hayworth, who I think is on the call, and me. And we used, at the time, the best we had, which was the Megavision 50 megapixel CCD. And I tried to remind myself which lens we had. And I think this was before the UV Vis IR uh, lens that we use now. So I think this was the standard 120 millimeter Schneider lens that we had used prior to that, which of course does not give you the uh, parfocal, the uniform focus across from the UV to the IR. But it was what it was. So here is Ken and Greg with the map at Yale in 2014. So you get some idea of the size of it. It's about 2 meters wide and 1.25 meters tall. It's a painting, um, and the writings on it had faded so much that the argument is that most of it had never been read, or at least not in modern times. So because of the size of it, we had to image it in sections. So we had 11 sections across and 5 vertically, so 55 tiles. And so there's our joking picture, so you can see how tall people are, standing in front of the map with the camera. And this was the system that we had then, significantly fewer reflective bands than we currently use. 365 to 940. We also did fluorescence because we were there to image the map, and the map had a backing. There was no reason to do transmission, so we didn't bring the capability for that. So we got 22 bands per tile, and we were able to do the map. Once we had the setup done, we were able to do the map fairly quickly. So we did 2 run-throughs of the map, and then we had some uh, time to spare. But before I get to that, let me just show a couple of the pictures from this. The processing arguably was finished within a year or so after we did the imaging, but there are still sections that we haven't read, and processing has started up again. Sana Hashim at the University of Toronto is working on one tile pretty much as I speak, and she and I are going to talk about it at 3 o'clock. So we're hoping to fill in some of the gaps and some of the writings on that. And just to show a couple of examples, many of you probably have seen these already. These are 3 images that were taken in the 60s of the map, and Chet used to say he spent 2 weeks trying to read this cartouche down in the bottom right corner. You can see some letters in places, but he couldn't get the whole thing. So after we did the imaging, and within 20 minutes, I was able to give him that. So he was able to read it, and he said, I can read the whole thing, and it's really boring. So I always like that as sort of a part of the unknowns when you do the imaging. Here's a second one, a cartouche in the Pacific Ocean. And so there's sort of a first run at processing, so you can see that there's some letters there. And here's a second run. And again, it's not perfect. You're only able to get, I don't know, maybe 2/3 of the characters, but Chet was able to figure out what it was saying. So that was why we were there in August of 2014. And as a result of that, Chet published his book in 2018, which based on the readings he got from the images. But after we got done with the imaging, we still had several days available to us. So the Voynich became a target of opportunity. And so we arranged with the library to image a few leaves of it. And at the time, we only did very basic processing and only for a few of them. So here's a snapshot that was taken while we were imaging this. So here's folio 17 recto of the Voynich. And here is, this, I must have had a typo there. I think this is 46 recto. Maybe it's 36. That's a typo. That's not the correct leaf. But anyway, we did imaging with those same bands that we used for the map. And so the data sat there until I flew back from Europe on August 8th, and I had a 7-hour layover at Dulles Airport. So I bought a day pass at the United Club and sat down and caught up on my reading. So I have a subscription to Atlantic. And while I pulled that up, the first thing I saw was the article entitled Intoxicating 500-Year-Old Mystery. And it was about the Voynich, and it was about Lisa Fagin Davis and her experience with it. Lisa couldn't be with us today. I'm hoping we'll get her to talk about, instead of the how, which is what I'm talking about today, talk about the why, the what, and the who at some point later on. So as a result, I sent Lisa a note after I read the article and told her that we had these images from 2014, and if she was interested, I could certainly make them available to her. And of course she was. And so this led to further work for the last month or so with a big assist from Bill Enders. And Lisa posted this on her blog on Sunday. And she sent me a note yesterday saying she's had 30,000 hits so far. So there certainly is some interest about this. So now to the couple of examples, and I should warn you up front, I'm not saying these are profound in any way. Lisa is very interested in them, but to me, there's nothing new about the manuscript. There's stuff new about the writing that was put on it afterwards. And so here's folio 1 recto, and you can see the green spots from the reverse side. So there's one of the pictures on the other side. And so Lisa got she immediately sent me a picture with her hand-drawn areas that she was interested in trying to get text from. So I went back to those and did processing on those. And so first, I didn't use all the bands. Again, this is hardly exhaustive. I mean, there's other stuff that probably should be tried. So we had the 22 image bands, but they include fluorescence with an ultraviolet blocking filter and an ultraviolet pass filter. And those are somewhat thicker. And so they give you more translation of the image. So I just didn't use those, but I did use the other 20. And so from those bands, I had to do the pre-processing, which included the calibration. So there's a spectralon reflector in the field of view that allows us to calibrate the reflectance. And then as I'll show you in a minute, one of the standard problems in this imaging is the fluorescence bands. You get the fluorescence process is not very efficient. So you get a relatively few photons coming back. When you illuminate with UV, look at the red, you get relatively few photons back. So you're going to get statistical noise. So to combat that, do a 3x3 median on it. And then I did sort of my standard thing, which is what we call blur and divide. And so and I see I had a typo here too. I said here I did 3 local averages. I did a local average over 101 squared region. Then I did it again. And then this is claiming I did it 3 times. I actually did it 5 times. So I got a significant blur of that. I'll show you an example in a second. And so this compensates for local variations in the background, like as though they're stains, or in the images in Verona, there's the deliberate coating with the reagent. So this is an attempt to try to compensate for that. And so then I only did one kind of processing after that, which is minimum noise fraction in ENVI. And so I got 20 process bands and then had to select those to get the pseudocolor that we're using for the image. So here is one section of folio 1 recto down there in the corner. This is in one of the areas that Lisa was interested in. And so this is illuminating with 365 and then taking the fluorescence through a red Ratten filter. So we're illuminating in the ultraviolet and then we're transmitting centered somewhere around 600 nanometers. So the illustration of the inefficiency of the fluorescence process is the statistical noise, this so-called salt and pepper that you see here. So then I did the 3x3 median, which pretty much removed that. It changes the resolution somewhat, but you want to avoid using those false statistics in the subsequent calculation. And then here's the 101 squared mean run 5 times. And now you sort of just see the background variation across that. Where it's darker, you get a slightly darker background. Then I did the ratio of that median with the mean. And so this compensates for the background variation. This is fairly standard technique we do. And then I did MNF and did pseudocolor from that. And so there's the result I get there. And you can sort of see some text that's running. Well, it's got a shape at the top and then sort of almost running diagonal from the upper right to the lower left. Mm-hmm. And this is, I was doing this last night, trying to be careful to get the same region. And it was the easiest way to do it. Didn't give me a very large field of view. But so here is that leaf again. And then here's one of the processed images from that. And then a magnified view of that. So down there on the bottom, once I got this, I was kind of excited. So I sent Lisa a note saying, does this name Jacobi mean anything to you? And it did to her. This is someone who had studied the book and I think may have even owned it at some point earlier. And she says, I know that name, so that's not all that exciting. But then the second thing, she said, I'm interested in the stuff up here on the right side. And so there's the result from that, the visual appearance, the processed image, and then what she was able to transcribe from that. And so this, you can see 2 sets of the alphabet A to Z, and then corresponding characters. So the suspicion is this was someone's attempt to make a code book. Of course, after the manuscript was written, my first dream was, oh, this is the person who wrote it. This is their code book. So now we can read it, but not true. So And then one other example, this is folio 47 recto. I don't know if this is of interest or not, but you look down there on the bottom right, there's some kind of pattern. To me, it almost looks like a cartoon of somebody's face. Lisa didn't seem to think this was significant, but I thought it was just interesting, was able to pull it out. So next steps, Lisa and I have just started to kick around. Is there a reason to actually go back and image the whole thing? I kind of hope there isn't, but given all the other things we have to do. But this is a decision for Lisa and her colleagues. And if we were to do that, we'd have to find a funding source. So there is sort of the result. And if of anything, I say, to me, the most interesting part is how it came about. The fact that we were able to go back and use data that we collected years and years ago to try to recover some stuff that we hadn't seen. So yeah, it took even less time than I thought it was going.
So Roger?
Yeah, I can't say. Oh, Keith. Okay.
So any reason why that name was either erased or not visible today and the code book?
We'll have to ask Lisa. And again, I'm hoping that we can get it. She's on a bus right now, so she couldn't be with us.
Okay.
Gregory.
Well, I'm glad that you did all the work on this. I wanted to add a few details which will fill in some gaps in the story of this. First of all, we did actually have the apochromatic lens, so that
Okay.
That's good.
So that must have been right after we got it, right after Ken got it.
Yeah, and
it
the
wasn't in the
is,
metadata though.
Yeah, well, we've improved some of our habits since then. I will say that I image processed this a long time ago, and then more recently again. I image processed it because it was the multispectral data, the raw data, and the processed data was displayed at the Folger at a conference run by Bill Sherman, whom maybe a couple of you may know. He now directs the Victorian Albert. He was a scholar who specialized in John Dee and in cryptography. And he was at the Folger at the time as a fellow, and he hosted an entire exhibition in which these data and some of the processed images I made were shown. And I had hoped at that time that it would ignite a whole bunch of scholarly interest in it. And in fact, it was crickets. That was quite sad. And that those crickets were there until about 2 years ago. And I was contacted by, of all places, the History Channel, or as we say, the non-history channel. And they were going to do, and as far as I know, they have done a special on the Voynich. And so I think they'd heard that I had some of the data, or I don't know, maybe they'd heard something from the Folger. I don't know. But I remember speaking to them, and I said, listen, and they wanted me to come and do this. This was during COVID, or near the end of COVID. And I said, well, I'd be interested, except that what we should know is that this manuscript is poison for any academic. Anyone who has a tenure track job or has anything to do with codicology or manuscripts, this is absolute poison, this manuscript. And lots of people have stayed away from it. You saw a picture there. There was a woman who was holding it down. She's one of the conservators named Paula Zayats, whose name is something that is kind of amusing. Yvonne would appreciate it. But she used to get every week at least, or every month, at least 2 crazies who would contact her about the Voynich with things. So much so that anyone who was associated with the Voynich trying to do serious work would be tainted. And I have to give huge credit for Lisa, in parts because she's not she's not a professor, but yet she has this scholarly standing. She can do that. She's done a great job in rehabilitating the manuscript, and that's a really good thing because there's several things that I was interested in, and I think that we could do. I've done careful codicological analysis, some of the images, and when I was there, I looked carefully and took some notes. But you could see multiple hands, but specifically, and maybe Roger, you could pull this up on the final verso. You can see when processed, you get a lot of show through from the back, but at the top, what you can see is at least several words seem to be in the same hand, by the way, as what you discovered, and I'd seen ages ago on folio 1, the same person who's trying to decode in a slightly later hand and trying to figure out Voynich. There's also a phrase which seems to be like a kind of mishmash Latin on that last verso. There are a variety of other things that I think that would argue for a re-imaging. First of all, we need to get some better images. You can tell, for example, the number of hands. You can also tell, having looked at it codicologically, you can tell that at least there are at least 4, maybe 6 hands. One of those people is tall, and you can tell that because the letters, the allographs. Whoops. Okay,
that's
the allographs.
116. Is that the one you're talking about?
It should be the last verso, and if we flip it around, we should be able to see the everything that's not show through.
When you mean flip it left to right? What do you mean?
No. You flip it just right. Yeah, flip it around. I meant 180. Yeah, and zoom in near the top. What you can see the light.
This is obviously a processed image, so
right. The light lavender up at top, you're going to see is the non-show through. There are, if you look at it, and this is from a couple of years ago, and I'm trying to remember, somewhere near up the top, you can see a word or phrase. There are a couple of letters which have clearly been traced in a different hand. And I think that those come down a little bit lower in the manuscript. Then you can see maybe it's everything that in the top left-hand corner. We'd have to look at it carefully. You can see something that might actually be a kind of seems to be Latin. So you can actually see this up at the top left here, which you're looking at now. It's certainly not Voynich. It's an Arabic alphabet. That's really important. The next thing that you notice is that the numbering is clearly early 15th century medieval numbering. Now, this could have come in afterwards, but the whole 1493 thing is rubbish. Medieval numbering, especially the 5, is quite easily in terms of in paleography. It's quite easily placeable. There's a very clear. You have to look at the rectos for this. There's a very clear paleography for the numbers, and you can see and you can date them, relatively accurately. And so this argues for an earlier thing. So the whole Columbus and that's not true. And as I was saying, you can also tell that in certain of the hands and certain of the leaves, the letters, and I measured them carefully, the letters at the top are shorter than the letters at the bottom. And that means that as the leaf was hanging on this kind of V-shaped lectern for copying, the people, a person who is short would be able to come down with a hand. A person who's tall, however, couldn't and had to, and it's typical, you lengthen the letters. So we have a lot of interesting codicological analysis that can be done on this. But the most important, I think, codicological analysis and the most compelling reason for re-imaging it is this. One of the things that I noticed and that I couldn't confirm also in the images they have online is that there are very few scratch outs and rewrites, incredibly few. And one of the things that has not yet been done, and I think that we should do that, and I think would be a great data science question as well, is to determine the average number of corrections in a manuscript produced in two different kinds of situations, one in a proper scriptorium, and then in a kind of, maybe catch as catch can. I mean, this is a scriptorium. We know that there are numerous hands, there are number of hands that they're working on it. But there are so few scratch outs, and with really good multispectral imaging, you could be absolutely certain. We could count absolutely those number of scratch outs, and the number of scratch outs. If you have almost no scratch outs, that argues for a manuscript that cannot be easily read and corrected, or it's a fake. One or the other. But it limits the number of possibilities that you can have when you have those data. And I think that's the best argument for doing it. And I mentioned to Lisa that I think that was my interest in it. The fact that she's rehabilitated the manuscript means that we can go back and image it without and get it, do a bit more work on it without coming off as cranks. But that's just my 2 cents or so.
Well, speak for yourself.
Roger,
My goal is to come off as a crank.
when you showed the raw image data, Roger, there were some black dots and white dots, which is that pattern noise on the camera, basically bad pixels on your camera?
I think that's just the statistical, that's just the Poisson noise in the sense, because we're only getting a few hundred counts per pixel.
Yeah,
but
there
it's
seems
dark
to be a
current.
regular pattern. Sorry?
Say again, Andy?
It's dark. Yeah.
I don't think it's dark current. I think this is just,
but on
the
the
small
camera,
number of counts we're getting.
Yeah, but on the camera, there is a distinct set of a pattern there. If you compare frame to frame, are they the same from frame to frame? If so, they could just be bad pixels on the camera, or
that's certainly
pixels.
possible. But these were flattened, so the hope is that it's already compensated.
Yeah, but they'll be probably saturating or completely dead pixels.
Yeah.
So if you look at another frame and see, you may find that you can build a bad pixel map, and then remove.
I have the same.
That may
I have the same camera.
Yeah,
no, I have the same camera today, and I think before we did this, first of all we captured dynamic darks. And then you'll notice that this pattern exists on the filtered images, especially the red, where we have an exposure of 25 seconds or more. This is before we realized that you really can't go past 25 seconds. And Ivan will know what I'm talking about with the E7. And so we probably had
exactly systematic of bad pixels, and those pixels then will be. It manifests when you have long exposures because those pixels are slightly more they've got a higher dark count. So if you just compare 2 frames and see if you have the same pattern.
You could do that.
And then
we have the flats for
remove that noise more. Yeah, or just if you have 2 of those frames, you just plot them, see if they're the same. Roger's doing it now.
We certainly have the flats for it. So we could have a look at that.
But flat fielding won't help because flat fielding is done at a reasonably high intensity and you don't see them. What you need to do is to compare 2 long exposures and then see if they overlap.
Yeah, I'm not talking about flat field. I'm talking about the flats. So images of a piece of white paper.
Yeah, but again, when you image white paper, it's normally a short exposure, and then you don't see that pattern noise.
We have depending on the we take a set of flats for also the filtered. So we'll have longer exposures and clearly, well, depending on the paper and its properties, especially its fluorescent properties. And in those days we didn't have the standard we use now, and I assume that Ivan does the same thing. We use an Epson a standard paper, and we know the qualities of that. In those days we didn't, and we may have used paper which has brightener, so it may not have been as good, but we did have longer exposures for the filtered shots when we captured flats. So we should have some data which would be useful. Keith can't hear you.
Right. To pick up on what Andy was just saying, those look like the salt and pepper noise look like isolated spots. And you used a median filter, which got rid of them, but also blurred the image a little bit. If he talked about making a bad pixel map, you could actually, if they're really isolated spots and significantly different from the values around them, you could just simply go over the picture, have a program go over the picture, find the spots and average those individual spots and retain your resolution in the image.
That's exactly what we do with the swerve cameras.
Yeah, I still think it's statistical noise. I mean,
That may very
we
well
only
be.
see it in the fluorescence bands that are far from the illumination, where the number of photons is so small.
It's because the exposures are very large, though. Let's have a look at it in the pub. 2 weeks' time.
Okay. Anybody else?
Audrey, do you have actually the flats for this?
Pardon?
Do you have the flats, or do you just have the flat
I think I've
list?
got everything that we took. I've got
Okay.
the original Martellus disc that I'm getting the data.
Okay, good. No, because otherwise I have a copy of the flats if you wanted them.
Anybody else? So other than that, I don't think we have anything scheduled, but I was hoping I could nudge Andy and BB and Bill Enders to talk a little bit about Hereford in preparation for talking about it in detail in a couple of weeks. I'm looking at Bill. Bill,
yeah, Bill,
I just dumped this on him, right? He didn't know I was going to say that.
So shall I set the scene, Bill? We had a trip to Hereford Cathedral about a month ago, 5 weeks ago, and acquired a whole load of images using our MSI system on the Hereford Gospels, which we've then given the data over to Bill and Dave, who are having a competition between them to see who can process the data first, I think. And what Bill's been producing is amazing. Of the data that's been sent back, we're starting to see some things, and Richard Gameson over here is reading the original layer of text that was in the manuscript. But the magic is in the processing, which Bill, do you want to talk about that?
Yes, I can. I was trying to pull up some images very quickly. The main success with the imaging, and just to kind of tip my hat to Richard Gameson, we were trying to work out a really good image of recognizing the text where we had an enlarged Q, and we couldn't quite read around it very well. And literally, Richard from the Q, he thought it might have been the Latin word quam, and then he saw a B, and he thought, this looks like Psalm, 69? And darn if that wasn't what it was. So it was just absolutely amazing. And I was trying to pull out those images very quickly and show you. The main thing I've been using is the software that Dave and his team developed for the Misha. And so I've been doing PCA and MNF, and that has been really giving me really good results. One of the things, as we've been kind of working through, we've been actually limiting some of the processing to the first 6 to 10 bands, and then picking up the fluorescent bands. And if I'm remembering this correctly, Andy, you're doing 4 fluorescent bands, one at an ultraviolet one, then you're cutting off at different wavelengths.
Yeah, we illuminate at 365 and then look at the emission at 450, 500, 550 typically, and there may also be some of them with just a long pass filtering as well. But it's predominantly 365 excitation and then narrow bandwidth emission. And what we're seeing essentially is the quenching of fluorescence of the parchment to the collagen. The autofluorescence is attenuated where you've got residual galactanic ink on the page.
And the results have been really quite stunning. Let's see, over the weekend, I actually found a enlarged D that is absolutely amazing. That if you look at the page, you'd swear that there really wasn't much there at all. And Andy, if you want to talk for a second, let me find these images and I'll show a few images to people there.
Yeah, so just to explain to people what the system is, we have a set of LED illumination sources that we can turn on and off. And then we're imaging through a filter pack where we can select the emission from 365 up to 1050. So we can excite at whatever wavelength we want and look at whatever emission band, scatter or emission that we're looking for. We're imaging through an APO lens onto it's a Max DSLR. So it's a monochrome DSLR chip that we're imaging onto. And the whole thing is one push. So we've now engineered the software so that you can just push one button and the whole data set gets automatically acquired. So that reduces errors of transcribing the numbers and so forth, which we used to be spectacularly bad at. I think in total in a morning, we've got about 600 images, which we've got as JPEGs and also as the RAWs. So the RAWs can be reprocessed to TIFFs or whatever else we want. And I think you've been processing the TIFFs into the RAWs into regular TIFFs. You can take the RAW files and treat them as though they haven't got a Bayer filter because the camera doesn't have a Bayer filter, and you get slightly higher spatial resolution. But to be honest, I don't think the spatial resolution is a problem for us. We're typically imaging areas. The page size on the Gospels is about what, 25 by about 18 centimeters, and we're imaging 2 frames per page per folio. So I have to say, looking when we had a list of folio we were going to do, so we sit down, we get the book in place, snap, 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 move the page, snap, 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 and once you're in that mode, you just look at the next folio that's on the list. And I have to say, looking at some of them, I was thinking, why the heck are we doing this page? Because there's nothing on it, and it's only when, as you say, Bill, that folio 100 is just incredible. What the other thing we have to go back and look at, I guess, is the quire structure in this book, because we don't know exactly where. I don't know where the quire is and where these folio are in the quire. But I think the other thing of note, perhaps, is worth pointing out here. It's really unusual to find a British manuscript that's palimpsested, and I think is it the second one? I think Richard was saying the second one known. There's very few of them, mainly because there's so much rain here and lots of grass and lots of sheep and cows, so you can just get new parchment. You don't have to recycle it. And we have to
Black Book.
This is a really early manuscript, so obviously it's palimpsest of something that was even earlier, which is incredibly exciting.
We've done actually two Welsh palimpsests. One of them, Black Book of Carmarthen. Both were palimpsested. So that's 2 already. So maybe they did it more in Wales.
When did they date to?
12th century, and the other one, the Welsh Triads. I'm not sure. Maybe slightly later, but not much.
Modern stuff, then, eh?
Well,
yeah,
the Gospels are very much earlier. They're very.
That's like a new book. Yeah, the Hereford is around 800, so
yeah,
it's early. If I can, let me see if I can share my screen okay here.
Oh, yes.
And this is one of the pages. You can see that on the Misha, there's some data that came through. So I knew that there was something going on here. And if I move into one of the recovery images, you get this. And you can see the wonderful insular D there with a nice curved top. And you can start to make out letters here. And I don't know how well this is coming through on everybody's screen, but we've got a D.
Pretty good.
Pretty good?
Yep.
And because Richard sorted out 96R as being a psalm. We knew this was the psalm, so this is Psalm 70 without any trouble. Let me see if I get a little better image here.
I think what Richard said was he looks at it with on a big monitor from a distance with his glasses off, and then he can read it. Your brain does a lot of processing or subsequent processing as well.
Yes, it does.
Have you guys do you have a transmissive light for this for your system?
No, it'd be very difficult to do it on this book, Greg. The page doesn't open, the book itself doesn't open terribly well, and it would be hard to squeeze a light sheet in. We might get away with an electroluminescent light sheet, but certainly the sort where you can change the wavelength would be harder.
What how much does it open? How many degrees does it open?
Probably about 100 degrees.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can certainly do that with
but then getting so, but it's a very narrow section. So if you want to put one of the light sheets based on the acrylic sheets,
no, they're not that thick. No,
you're talking about the electroluminescent sort.
Yeah, no, the ones that we have from the Megavision system are maybe Ivan, correct me if I'm wrong, no more than about 4 millimeters. Yeah, about 4 millimeters. I can't hear you, Ivan.
Yeah. I don't know if you can hear me. There is a
now I
PCB
can.
running in the background. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Repeat this again. 4 millimeters. What?
The light sheet is about 4 millimeters thick. No more than 4 millimeters thick.
No, it's less. It's 1.5.
Less. I would say it's 1.5. Okay. Yeah. It's very, very thin.
It's very thin. It's a fingernail, like 2 fingernails.
So as an electroluminescent device, even?
No. It's basically a sheet with dimples in it, and then the four bands are just injected from the edge.
Like a key.
Yeah. But I think that would there seems to be, especially above the top layer of writing, there seems to be that a good chunk of space where that might be beneficial.
Yeah, I think definitely so. And I think one of the interesting things with trying to sort out this manuscript is that there is transfer from the other side that confuses some of the writing. There's bleed through, and actually there's even bleed through of the palimpsest text in places, which really surprised me. And that just absolutely, yeah, I find that amazing. And here's the bottom side of that page. And I have no idea what this is supposed to be. It should be the start of a psalm that should be an I and an N, which I would guess to be enlarged. But I'm going to just kind of keep pushing on the processing. I don't know if we have a little bit of extra artwork here going on, or if there's just water damage that has stirred things in a way that gives us a weird processing. You can see the lettering down here isn't coming out terribly strong. But I'm going to play with this page this weekend and see if I can get it any better than what I currently have.
Yeah. Are you getting any to use a word that Bill Christensberry coined ages ago, transflection? That I noticed that you didn't have anything under the first leaf, and therefore potentially you're getting something from leaves that are underneath that first level. You don't have anything block it. Did you notice that you're getting some of that, because you're talking about bleed through and perhaps bleed through palimpsest, and I'm wondering whether or not that might be part of the problem.
I don't believe so. I think the pages were thick enough, and I haven't noticed anything coming all the way. I don't think I've noticed anything coming all the way through deeper than the other side of the page. And what's coming through from the other side of the page is rare. And that's when the bleed through from the palimpsest text coming through, I thought was just really extremely rare and odd. But it's clearly there. But I'll watch for that. There could be something I missed there.
Yeah, and just put something underneath, which would probably as just a general practice, prevent that kind of thing, because that does happen. One other question. I was looking, if you could move up to the top again. What I was interested in is whether or not the palimpsest is from a radically larger, or how much larger do you think the palimpsested leaf was? I mean, it's clearly slightly larger, but was it just slightly trimmed and then reused, or was it something,
So
quite a bit bigger?
Richard has a theory on this already. He's written half the paper.
I don't want to traipse on his by asking a question, but it seemed really interesting.
Yeah, we want to give them the opportunity to still surprise us.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got you. I got you.
I think with
giving
literally
us a full story.
Within 2 days of Bill sending this over, Richard had sort of read it and written the summary article, hadn't he?
Nice.
But you're right, it was obviously a bigger book and a bigger page.
Andy, can I ask you a question about the max conversion? So I saw some of the data, and I was expecting it to be completely monochrome, right? And it wasn't. The histogram, if you open it up in raw therapy, shows the red, green, and blue channels, and they were nowhere near identical. I mean, they were not, completely different. Is there something about the way they do it that would explain that?
I think that is an artifact of the conversion from RAW to TIFF by the package that you're using. When you look at the camera, as you're recording data on the camera, you look at the RGB intensities, you see they're pretty much the same. But of course, when the RAW to TIFF process is converted, unless you're using something like Monochrome's DNG or one of the packages that knows there's no Bayer filter, then it tries to apply a Bayer filter. So it treats the data as though it had a Bayer filter, and that comes up with an RGB, because obviously it then weights the pixels according to that. So I think it's a post-processing thing. That the raw data, when you look at it, the RGB are about the same intensity. So it genuinely is a monochrome camera, Tom. If you like, what I can do is 1 week, if you want to, I can set a demo up to show you that. I can actually do a live demo on my camera and put it on screen.
Interesting.
In fact, it's a really interesting question, actually, because I have another question for you. Well, it's one for Helen and yourself. At some point, we would like to figure out how to use Bayer cameras, but there's a problem with the processing of the data. When you use a Bayer camera looking at RGB data, filtered image data, you get a whole lot of problems. It'd be really interesting to talk to you about that.
Yeah.
I've got the data, but I just need to figure out it's one of those sanity checks, probably a chat with Dave and yourself and Helen.
Yeah, and that would be great. And what would be interesting here is I ended up and couldn't go to a conference and had extra money I had to spend. So I've got a full spectrum Canon R7 camera, but it still has the Bayer filter on it. So it'd be interesting to use that camera and compare it to data that you're actually getting. And
we also have a sister camera that's the same.
Oh, okay.
Actually, and I should we've got two of the Max cameras. We've got an EOS 90 and an R7. Both of them have got defects on the chip. So when the debayering is done, you're left with a slight problem in a couple of areas, in different areas on the two cameras, because there's some crap left on the chip. So the advantage of having the Bayer camera is you just take the filter out and you're not going to cause damage to the chip that way. But both of our chips have got slight defects. But short of buying a Leica or I think it's a Pentax monochrome camera, but they're silly expensive. Or you go to a scientific grade camera, which may be a good solution, actually, because then you don't run into the problem of the dark noise or the hot pixels that we're seeing, or I think we're seeing earlier, because you'd have a deep cooled camera, you could do better imaging with that.
So can we hope you guys can give us the full story next meeting. I mean, now that you've given us some percentage of it already, but
I would love if I would love it if Richard would also join, because it's great to have, you know, a great codecologist and paleographer to be able to add information to what's a really fascinating, you know, text. That would be great if you could persuade him to join.
Yeah, he tends to take September off, but we'll try and schedule something for October. It'd be good to do
that. Should we talk about what we might have in coming up? Because if that's in October, that's great. Does anyone else have some ideas for things that we could? Is anyone else working on something that they might be interested in presenting on?
You could try and, since Dave's not here, we could volunteer him perhaps. He got some, I sent him some data from some Greek palimpsests from one of the college libraries. So he's been processing some of those. So that might be in the this coming term, certainly.
I have some stuff from the Dante palimpsest in the Triulciana, which is I think the only palimpsest Dante we have, which has turned out to be really, really productive. And then I don't know, maybe they'll let me show some of the Titanic stuff. There's a lot of Titanic stuff that I've been doing over the past couple of years, which I think some of it is out of embargo, but that might be interesting.
Hmm.
I might be interested in getting some of y'all's take on some of the Kalari stuff that I've been doing at some point, but I'm not quite up for presenting in the short term.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, keep it in mind, and let's anybody has any thoughts, you feel free to send a note to me or to Julie Decker. But I sort of volunteered to try to arrange the sessions, so you can send it to me first. And we'll see what's happening in a couple of weeks. And I know Keith and I are going to go off to England to see Nigel, and maybe after we've done that, we'll have something to talk about. Maybe.
Roger, are you going to tell us more about Mount Athos than the layover?
I guess Mike Phelps probably needs to make a judgment as to what we can say on that. We can certainly talk about the trip.
Yeah, let's chat also with Damian and figure out, we got a couple things we could present. Potentially the Great Lavra, because that's not palimpsest, that's transfer and has a different set of problems. And I think that'd be interesting. The project we did with Garrick Allen at Glasgow would be nice. But let's chat about that. We can fill in some content too here.
Well, as a matter of fact, that's the same trip we're doing in a couple of weeks, and
exactly
giving talks on. So yes, that's true.
That'd be easy.
All right. Well, we're almost at time. That was a really. I'm thrilled, Roger, that you've kind of you know, reawakened interest in the Voynich.
It was fun how it just sort of happened, right?
Yeah. I mean, we have.
I didn't know Lisa was interested in it, so that was my exposure to that.
And I mean, it proves the notion that there's a lot of data that we have out there, which needs to be processed, is totally underutilized, and some of it's entirely unseen and unknown by scholars, and we need to find a way to remedy that. We really do.
And that's part of what I'm hoping will come out of our meeting with Nigel to revisit Archimedes some more.
Roger, do you remember about my question at the beginning? You remember what I asked you about the bands?
Yeah.
For the Victor's palimpsest. So Will you recall them or not?
I'm hoping that Keith can dig up what his process data were and give you the description of which bands were used. Like I said, my data has disappeared down the rabbit hole, and I'm not sure.
Yeah, there were a couple. There were a couple bands that I was using, and you went and tried them as well, and we're getting some good results. So
Yeah.
I'll look that up.
Yeah, and my memory is it was 1 to 7 and something in the teens. But I don't, and of course I don't remember which bands those corresponded to, but that'd be easy to figure out.
I just remember that it was unusual, so I'll go look it up.
Yeah.
Yes, that's why I'm asking you.
Yeah, Anya's kind of desperate to find out what's useful.
What palimpsest are you talking about, Anna? Which
About
manuscript?
the Verona palimpsest.
Okay.
The first trip.
Remember when we first got some things on there, Mike, I was playing around with some particular bands, and that was where we were getting the first results, and then Roger picked up from that and carried it on.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good.
Well, thanks everybody for showing up.
Yeah.
And I hope to see many, if not all of you in a couple of weeks.
Very good.
And
Thank
I
you,
hope
Roger.
to see you in a couple of minutes, Roger.
Yeah.
Thanks, Roger.